So I came to WSET as an intern and I was super excited. I got to work with the legendary Jeff Taylor and I was in awe. Of him, of Susan Garrett. These are people that I had watched growing up, and there I was right in the middle of things. And boy, was the newsroom different back then. Back then, we had electric typewriters. And throughout the day, that buzz of the electric typewriters would get louder and louder and faster and more intense. And as it led up to the newsroom and everybody was writing their scripts, it was loud, if you remember, in the newsroom. And we would have to kind of yell at each other. So there was lots of yelling, not because we were mad, but just because we couldn't hear over those typewriters. Now I know everything's on the computer and it's a lot more quiet. It's stressful in a different way. So everybody who's watching, working there now knows that it is more stressful, probably. There's lots more responsibilities. But back then, those typewriters were so loud.
And when you started, though, you didn't start on air.
No, I started as a producer. I was an associate producer, which basically means helping everything get done. I learned a lot, and then I moved up to being a weekend producer and then helping during the week. And I made every mistake that you can make. My brothers in town and my father made fun of me endlessly about all of my mistakes, because the terrible thing about being in the news is when something goes wrong, all of your family and friends see exactly what you did wrong. So everybody knows what you're doing. And so the pressure was always on, but I loved it. And then I started working in Roanoke as a reporter, a bureau chief, which was also super exciting. Roanoke is amazing. I learned so much from everybody there that I worked with. And then I eventually came back and started anchoring.
And we'll move on to, to your time here in your career in just a minute, but I kind of want to go back because you actually came to WSET a few times when you were very young, before you had a career here.
Yeah, so my family only watched Channel 13 and we were faithful viewers. And the very first time I ever got to go to the television station was when I won Little Miss Lynchburg. And as part of that, I got to be interviewed live on television. And my mom was so nervous for me. I remember her curling my hair and I wore little gloves and I was really dressed up and fancy. And I went in, I remember they put the microphone on and it kind of hung around my neck. And I sat there and I have no idea what I said. It's all a blur, but I just remember how I felt being there on camera.
And then you also came back a little later for something called Kitty College.
Somehow I was chosen by my organization to represent, I think it was third grade in Kitty College. And everybody watched Kitty College back then. And I mean, you would have thought I was on Jeopardy because of all the pressure. But as I remember, I had two teammates and we were on one team, and Jim Stapleton was the host and he would ask us questions. And we each got to answer one individual question or maybe two. And then for the final question, we got to decide as a group what the right answer would be. And we took it very seriously. I felt like everybody in town was watching the show, which might not have been the case, but I felt like it. And my mom was in the studio across the way taking photographs of all this, documenting it. And I remember she curled my hair and she told me that I had to smile the entire time throughout all the stress. So she was there making sure that I was smiling to look like I was having a really good time, when really all I felt was the pressure of answering those questions right. It was a big show. It was a good show. They should bring back that show.
So how did you do?
We won 3 times in a row and we lost the 4th. And all these years later, that happened in the 3rd grade. All these years later, I still hate the fact that we lost that 4th round.
Do you remember the questions? Any of them?
No, it was 3 weeks in a row. So we went every week for 3 weeks. And I kept in touch with one of my teammates, David Bowman. Hi, David. I think he's still in Lynchburg. I don't know what happened to Donna, but I don't remember any of the questions. No, I just remember all of the lights and the pressure and feeling like everybody was going to know if I made a mistake.
Well, you talked a little bit about, Jeff Taylor, Susan Garrett, some what are some other names you remember from around here at that time when you were working here, when you came back as an employee?
Right. Well, when I came back as an employee, I just felt like I had the opportunity of a lifetime. Really, it's a place that I watched growing up. My parents watched, and I just felt so comfortable because I felt like I knew everybody, but I was also really nervous. Jeff Taylor, Susan Garrett, Charlie Gibson started at Channel 13, and the pressure was just really intense. Finding out what was going on around town was such a thrill. But then, you were always looking at the clock. I still look at the clock all the time because of all the deadlines constantly. Now things are a little bit quicker because everything is computerized. Back then, though, we had to bring a physical tape back, put it in a machine, find what we were going to use, edit it. It took so much longer. And then, as you remember, it wasn't just like in the computer system where they could push play in the computer system. We had to get that final tape out of the machine, sprint down those spiral staircases down to where all the machines were. What do you call that? Master control? Playback?
Master control.
You had to go down to the master control area and give them the tape. And I know a lot of people think I might be exaggerating this. I am not. Every single newscast, there was one or two tapes that barely made air. So the editors were working up to the last second. And then I had to grab the tape, run it downstairs, put it in the machine at the very last second. And really, that was really stressful.
Kind of like, you remember the scene in broadcast news?
Yeah,
I have flashbacks when I see that.
Yeah. That's how it was. We had to sprint down to put the video on the air. And lots of times it just barely made it. Sometimes it didn't make it.
And what, I don't know if you remember, the one reason it might not make it is the tape might be there, but how long did it take that machine to get that tape in, set it all up, and you could just feel your stomach turning?
Right. So you had a story, you had it on tape, you would run down, the newscast was on, you were ready to put it in the machine, but then you had to wait for the previous tape to eject, which sometimes took 5 or 6 seconds, which felt like an eternity. Now you don't have to worry about any of that.
No, it can roll immediately. Tell me some of the biggest news stories you remember covering or that just happened while you were here.
Can you remind me?
Were you here for well, no, that was before us.
I remember when
the flood, right?
when the Soviet Union leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, came, and the Soviet Union was collapsing at the time. And he decided to come here to Lynchburg and do a tour of Thomas Jefferson's home, kind of retracing Thomas Jefferson. And I remember helping organize that and set that up, and the pressure that was on, because I knew that was a really big story. And so we did that.
That must have been before I got here. I don't remember that at all. You weren't here for the flood, I guess.
I don't know. Maybe I was. Maybe I just.
That's the flood of '85. That's 80s. I'm looking at some other things.
That started in 84, I think. 84, October of 84. Well, I interned before that. I interned in.
So you would have been here for the flood. You would have been working during the flood, right? Yeah, the big flood downtown, like where the whole city.
What? Oh, I did. Yeah.
It was during the election.
Yeah, I have no recollection, Patty.
You chose to forget that.
I wonder if I was in.
Oh, the Haysom trial. The Haysom trial.
Oh, I was working the night of the Haysom murders, and it was just everything was going normally. And I remember Jeff Taylor. Yeah, I was in the newsroom the night of the murders, and we could hear things on the police scanner that police were going to this house, and we could hear things kind of developing, and we sent a crew out there. And then we found out what happened. And that was probably one of the very first major breaking news stories that I was a part of there. As all of this information was coming in, just the horror of what happened. And still, all these years later, it's still in the news. There are still developments happening.
Yeah. Just within the past 6 months, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Were you involved? There were a lot of community projects. Were you involved in, was there an organization you were involved in a lot or consistently around here? Okay. Oh, I know. You've got some bloopers you have to remember.
Some what? Bloopers?
Bloopers that you remember?
There's a lot of bloopers. Lots of time. There's a lot of bloopers. One that I remember, one blooper was, I know the teleprompter, there was one blooper that I can clearly remember is we were doing breaking news and I had really no idea what the breaking news was, but the producer said it'll be in the prompter. So the show was going on, this breaking news popped up in the teleprompter, and for some reason, the teleprompter stopped rolling. So I was going like this for the teleprompter to keep going. And the director thought I meant come back to me on camera. So I'm there like waving my arms, just trying, my voice is even trying to read this breaking news. And they came out to me doing this weird thing. I still remember that. And there were a lot of bloopers. Most of the bloopers were 100% my fault.
I find that hard to believe. One of the better ones, and I don't know if this will make it in because this would take a lot to explain, but the funniest one I remember is when you answered the question the question was never asked.
That wasn't a blooper. So at the end of the show, we had signed up with this educational organization, and students all over the area had to listen to the newscast to get the answer to the question. And it was a maybe 45-second story about something in history that was significant. And we would give the answer, and then the students would take that answer to school the next day. And I don't know if they got extra credit. I'm not exactly sure how it worked. But one day we had so much news, we ran out of time to show the story. But I knew that all these kids at school were waiting to get the correct answer. So we came out at the end, and right before we said, "Good night, everybody," I said, "And Jonas Salk invented the polio vaccine." I'm Michelle Wright. Thanks for watching. It didn't make any sense at all. Yep, that was me.
Oh my God, that one cracks me up. Trying to think of anything else here. What am I missing? Can you think of anything else that like?
One thing in my little first pictures I sent you is you'll notice WSET was first called WLVA as part of the radio station. And so if you look at those pictures, you can see the big WLVA on the building. And if you look even closer, you can see the news truck was called the Newsmobile, which I think is interesting. I don't know how many people remember that, but we rode around in newsmobiles, kind of like the Batmobile, I guess, to collect the news that day.
Except for 2 letters are missing, so it's actually the news pole.
What happened to those letters? That was a well-used vehicle.
Oh my gosh, these are great. These are great. They're going to love these. I don't know how many of these they have, but these are so great.
What about Charles Middleton? You know, one of the most impressive people that I worked with when I first got there was Charles Middleton. And the big commercial kept saying, "Charles said it would." And I remember the Hillcats baseball team, whatever it was called at the time, so a little kid would say, "Well, Charles said it would," when it was raining and he got, socked by all the baseball players. But he was really, really something. And I was there when at first he would just write on a board what the weather was going to be. And he would put the temperatures on himself, and he would put the sunshine or the rain. And then all of a sudden, everything became computerized, and he had to learn how to stand in front of the green screen and point to things that weren't really there. And it was so impressive to see him. He was about the age of retirement, or even past the age of retirement. And he learned that new skill, and he did a great job.
But as I kind of recall, he wasn't crazy about it. He was old fashioned. He kind of liked the old stuff.
He fought it for years, and everybody else, I think probably in the whole country, had already gone to using everything on the digitized in the computer, but Charles still wanted, and you remember, he would write on the board as he was doing his forecast, and you could hear the squeaky squeak of the dry erase markers on there during his performance of doing the forecast. And all that went away, but I miss those old days. They were good times.
They were. Okay. I'm trying. Can you think of anything else? I'm because like I said, yours is going to be just a small part of my first one, and we're going to be using these throughout the rest of the year. And so we're just, I mean,
I can't really think of anything else.
Yeah,
I
I've
can't
got a
think of
list that
anything
Noreen
huge.
kind of, because a lot of these that she put down, you weren't here for. Oh, we of course remember Bill Deal.
Oh,
Bill, yeah, he had his kind of opinion. He did
Bill
sort of
Deal, yeah,
editorial,
and his son worked there, Danny Deal, and I produced the newscast for Danny as an anchor, and I still keep up with him, and so that was a big learning curve for me. So Danny put up with me learning how to produce a newscast, and Danny's father, Bill Deal, became somebody that would come on every Sunday night and do editorials, and he would work on it through the week, and we were always really eager to see what he was going to decide to talk about because we had no idea. That was totally up to him. And yeah, that was a real treat always hearing from him.
And sometimes he walked a fine line on those. That was back in the day. I kind of remember some talks about women drivers and things like that.
things were a little different then.
A little different then, yeah.
Well, I covered the PTL story. So we broke that actually.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah.
So we were, I was at my mom's house on Friday, my parents' house. So I was at home and I got this news tip from Jerry Falwell that Jim Baker was having to step down from PTL and Nightline was going to break it. And all these people kept calling him and he wanted Channel 13 to break the story because it was his hometown. So I didn't really know much about Jim Baker or any of that at all. And we didn't have Google then, so I couldn't just easily find out the answers like I do now. So Channel 13 broke that story at 6 o'clock on that Friday that the news was happening. And then that became one of the major things that I followed through my career there is all the developments with that.
And talk about what you're doing now.
What am I doing now? Well, now I'm in Pittsburgh at the ABC affiliate here, which is owned by Hearst. It's called WTAE, and I anchor in the mornings.